Shrek the Third, adapted by Kathleen Weidner-Zoerfeld, read by Richard Mitchley. Prince Charming galloped across the plain on his trusty steed. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. "Onwards to the highest room of the tallest tower!" cried Prince Charming valiantly. "My princess awaits rescue!" In the little run-down theatre, Charming was playing his part with gusto, but the audience fidgeted. The prince's steed was a wooden hobby-horse, and the set was even worse, a wobbly tower and a cheaply painted backdrop. Prince Charming pretend galloped to the tower and tossed his blonde hair back with a flourish. A princess leaned out of the tower window. "Hark! The brave Prince Charming!" "Fear not, fair maiden!" cried Charming. "I shall slay the monster that guards you and take my place as rightful king." A short, round, cheap ogre costume shuffled onto the stage. "Grrr!" The audience cheered. Prince Charming glanced at them in disbelief. Why were they cheering the ogre? He hated that ogre, and everyone else should hate him too. Charming pulled himself together. "Prepare, foul beast, to enter a world of pain with which you are not familiar." A heckler stood up and tossed his chair. "Off the stage, Goldilocks!" Charming ducked. The chair whizzed past and into the rickety tower. The tower creaked, groaned, and came down with a loud boom. Prince Charming stood amid the rubble, covered with dust, framed by the princess's window. The ogre and the audience roared with laughter. Furious, Prince Charming shook his mangled sword at them. "Someday you'll be sorry!" "We already are," joked another heckler. Charming stalked off the stage. He stepped outside into the dark alley where he had set up a makeshift dressing room. On the hill in the distance, he could see the magnificent castle of Far, Far Away. He remembered how that horrible ogre, Shrek, had robbed him of his chance to rule the land. The picture of his fairy godmother taped to his vanity mirror caught his eye. Her handwriting said, "Don't stop believing, Mummy's little angel." "You're right, Mother. I can't let this happen. I can't." Prince Charming fixed the castle in his steely gaze. "I am the rightful king of Far, Far Away, and I promise you this, Mother, I will restore my throne." A gust of wind blew a newspaper right into his face. He peeled it off. Across the front page was a picture of Shrek and his new bride, Princess Fiona, waving to the citizens. That was wrong, wrong, wrong! It was Prince Charming who should be married to the princess. That's the way the story was supposed to go. "This time, no one will stand in my way," he shouted. "No one!" Meanwhile, at the castle, Shrek and Fiona were having trouble adjusting to the royal routine. But with Fiona's father turned into a frog by the fairy godmother and sick in bed, it was up to Shrek to look after the kingly duties. First thing was a knighting ceremony in the crowded church. Puss in Boots bowed and handed Shrek a sword. With his own sword, Puss demonstrated how a knighting should be done, one light touch on each shoulder. Shrek practiced, one touch here, one there, and accidentally stabbed the knight. The crowd gasped in horror. "Ah!" cried Donkey. Things went from bad to worse. Once they'd got help for the poor soldier, there was a christening ceremony for a new Royal Navy boat. The Admiral handed Shrek the champagne as he leaned against the ship for just a second, and the ship sailed away. In a panic to break the champagne, Shrek threw the bottle with his mighty ogre arm. It smashed a hole in the ship, and it sank like a stone. Donkey and Puss looked at each other in dismay. Finally, the royal ball was scheduled for the evening, and it was time for a makeover. Raoul, the royal makeup artist, tied aprons around Shrek and Fiona and scrutinized the big green ogres. He opened up a bag full of gardening tools, hauled out a circular sander, and began filing down Shrek's gruesome toenails. Fiona, in the next chair, was having her nose hairs plucked. "Ow!" she cried. Then socks and shoes, collars and corsets, rivets and belts. Finally, the new royal couple, trimmed and cinched, stood in the finest Renaissance regalia. Donkey and Puss gasped with delight. The royal page began to announce the guests. "The Duke and Duchess of Cheesington! Lord Meatballs and Lady Red Sauce! Lord Cooser and Lady Luncheon Meat!" Shrek took Fiona's hand. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." "Just grin and bear it, okay? Just until Dad gets better," said Fiona. Then she smiled. "Shrek, you look handsome." Shrek smiled back and leaned in for a kiss. But alas, the bulk of their new outfits prevented it. "Oh, my butt is itching up a storm, and I can't reach it in this monkey suit," groaned Shrek. Then he spied one of the servants, Fiddlesworth, carrying a long ruby sceptre. "Perfect!" chortled Shrek, and asked Fiddlesworth to scratch his butt with the sceptre. At that moment the curtains rose, and the Master of Ceremonies announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, Princess Fiona and Sir Shrek." The audience cheered, but the applause trailed off as one by one they noticed Fiddlesworth scratching away at Shrek's butt. "Scratch it, Fiddler, old boy!" cried Shrek, unaware that all eyes were on him. "Ah, all right, you've got it." Shrek," interrupted Fiona. By now the crowd was gasping in horror. "Shrek!" cried Fiona. Oh, get it! Oh, scratch that thing!" sang Shrek. "Shrek!" Startled out of his scratching daze, Shrek finally looked up and saw the crowd staring. Fiddlesworth froze. Shrek chuckled nervously, his belly shook, and his new belt buckle flew off and hit Donkey in the eye. "Ow! My eye!" screamed Donkey. Stumbling blindly, he fell against a guard who was holding a battle-axe. The axe flew out of the guard's hands, sailed past Puss's head, and knocked over a big vase. Fiona fielded it, but the slosh of the water in the vase swept her off balance. She fell and bumped into Shrek, whose collar sprang loose and slapped him in the face, while the clasp holding up his pants let go. Poor Shrek found himself with his collar up and his pants down. "Fiona!" he cried in dismay. He shuffled towards her, tripped over his pants, and came down on a loose wooden plank. The other end of the plank rose up like a catapult, sending Fiddlesworth flying through the air. The crowd gasped as they watched him plummet, right into a waiter carrying an armload of flaming skewers. The skewers flew whizzing past Donkey and speared the curtains, setting them on fire. Donkey pulled out a skewer, blew out the flame, and took a bite. "Shrimp!" he cried. "My favourite!" As he munched, the fire spread. Soon the ceiling beams were burning and dropped, and the stage came crashing down, sending the buffet tables crashing into Shrek and Fiona. They stood helplessly amid the chaos, wiping food from their faces, wondering if they would ever feel ready to be king and queen. Shrek stormed into their bedroom that evening. "That's it, Fiona. We're leaving. I'm not cut out for this." Shrek fell onto the bed in exasperation. A head and hooves popped out from under the covers beside him. "I think that went pretty well," declared Donkey. Shrek's eyes were about to pop out of his head. "Donkey!" he shouted. He hauled Donkey out of bed and carried him to the door. "Out you go!" cried Shrek, giving the pesky equine the boot. Shrek turned back, satisfied, only to see Puss reclining on his pillow. "Some people just don't understand boundaries," sighed Puss. Shrek picked the annoying feline up by the scruff of the neck, tossed him out the window, and slammed it shut. Finally, alone with Fiona, Shrek lay back in bed. Fiona tried to soothe him. "Just think, a couple more days, and we'll be back home in our vermin-filled shack, strewn with fungus, filled with the rotting stench of mud." Shrek drew in a deep breath. For the first time all day, he relaxed. "And, Fiona hesitated, maybe the pitter-patter of little feet." Shrek chuckled. "That's right. The swamp rats will be spawning." Shrek cuddled her close and leaned in for the kiss he had waited for all day. To a sudden loud pounding, the door burst open, and a royal page stood at attention and cried, "Princess Fiona!" Shrek groaned. "Somebody," he huffed, "had better be dying." The page hurried Shrek and Fiona to the king's bedroom, where they found him lying on his lily pad. "I'm dying," he told them in a violent coughing fit. Shrek gave Fiona a guilty look. "Harold," Queen Lilian said soothingly. "Fiona," sputtered the king, "your love for Shrek has taught me so much." Fiona smiled. He turned towards Shrek. "My dear boy, I am proud to call you my son." Shrek smiled too. "Now, There is a matter of business to attend to. The king was seized by another coughing fit. His breathing stopped. Puss swept off his plumed hat with a flourish. "The Frog King is dead," he declared. Fiona's eyes filled up with tears. Suddenly the king gasped and began coughing again. Donkey nudged Puss. "Put your hat back on, fool," he whispered. "Shrek, this kingdom needs a new king. You and Fiona are next in line for the throne." "Now, you see, Dad, that's why people love you," Shrek said nervously. "Even on your deathbed, you're still making jokes." The king stared back at him, stone-faced. "Oh, come on. There's got to be somebody else," dithered Shrek. "Aside from you, there is only one remaining heir," replied the king. "His name is—" The king gasped for breath. "Is—" Shrek and Fiona leaned closer, desperate to hear. The king stopped breathing and fell back on his lily pad. "Daddy!" wailed Fiona. A fly escaped from the king's mouth. Puss's plumed hat came off once more. Suddenly the king's froggy tongue darted out and caught the fly. Puss quickly put his hat back on. "His name is Arthur," said the king, chewing the fly. "I know you'll do what's right," wheezed the king with his last breath. Fiona burst into tears and threw her arms around her husband. Shrek could only stand there like a statue, speechless and in shock. Their beloved Frog King was laid out in a shoebox. The land of Far, Far Away was at its weakest. Now was the time to take action. The dastardly Prince Charming strutted into the Poison Apple Inn and surveyed the scene. Rumpelstiltskin chatted with a friend, while Captain Hook played the piano and a vile witch sang along. The evil puppet master was drowning his sorrows in beer, while the big Cyclops rode the medieval mechanical bull. Snow White's evil queen was playing pool with another witch. Prince Charming hung his cloak on the branch of an evil tree. The tree flung it on the grimy stone floor. All eyes turned as Prince Charming daintily laid a white handkerchief over a bar stool and sat down. He cleared his throat dramatically, hoping to get his old friend Doris's attention. "What does a prince have to do to get a drink around here?" But it was Mabel, Cinderella's other ugly stepsister, who rose up from behind the bar. "Where's Doris?" asked Charming. "She's not welcome here," growled Mabel, "and neither are you." She spat into an empty beer mug and wiped it with her towel. "What do you want, Charming?" "Just a chance at redemption," he laughed, "and a fuzzy navel." Charming rose and addressed the crowd. "And fuzzy navels for all my friends." Captain Hook raked his hook across the piano keys. "We're not your friends," he growled. Suddenly, Mabel grabbed Prince Charming and pinned him to the bar. The captain placed his hook against Charming's throat. "You don't belong here," he threatened. "You're absolutely right," stammered Prince Charming. "But do any of us?" "Do a number on his face," cried the Cyclops. No, wait," cried Charming, thinking fast. We are more alike than you think." "Cry me a river, pretty boy," sneered the evil queen. Charming turned towards the queen. "The 7 dwarves saved Snow White, and then what happened? They left you, and now here you are, hustling pool for your next meal. How does that feel?" "Unfair," replied the queen. "And you," cried Charming, turning to the puppet master. "Your star puppet abandons the show to go and find his father." "I hate that little wooden puppet," whined the puppet master. "And Hook," Prince Charming paused dramatically and looked down at the steel hook against his throat. "Need I say more?" Hook backed off, feeling insecure about his metal appendage. "And you, Frumpy Pigskin." "Rumpelstiltskin," he was corrected crossly. "Where's that firstborn you were promised, eh?" As the villains responded, Prince Charming's confidence grew. He looked Mabel in the eye. "Remember how you couldn't get your little fat foot into that tiny glass slipper?" Mabel nodded. Well, Cinderella is in far, far away right now, eating bonbons and cavorting with every last fairy tale creature that has ever done you wrong. Once upon a time, someone decided that we were the losers. But there are two sides to every story, and our side has not been told. By now, all the villains were listening to Prince Charming with rapt attention. "So who will join me?" he asked. "Who wants to come out on top for once? Who wants their happily ever after?" Down at the docks, Shrek, Donkey and Puss were bidding their loved ones a tearful farewell as they set out in search of Arthur. Puss took his latest love in his arms. "It is out of my hands, señorita. The winds of fate have blown on my destiny. But I will never forget you. You are the love of my life." At that, another love of Puss's life approached. He glanced over at her with moony eyes. "As are you." Dragon let out a soft, dragony wail, trying to hold back her tears as she said goodbye to her donkey dearest. I know, crooned Donkey. "I don't want to leave you either, baby, but you know how Shrek is. The dude's lost without me." She smiled a tender, understanding smile. Holding back tears of his own, Donkey looked down at his brood of little dronkies. "All right, be strong, babies, be strong," he cajoled. "Now, Coco, Peanut, you listen to Mummy, all right? And Bananas, no more roasting marshmallows on your sister's head. Oh, come here, all of you. Give your daddy a big hug." "Well, this is it," said Shrek. Fiona took a deep breath to brace herself. "Shrek, there's something I have to tell you. I really wish you weren't leaving right now because—" "I know, me too," interrupted Shrek. "But don't worry. We'll be back with this Arthur guy before you know it. You'll see. Soon it's finally going to be just you and me." "It's not going to be just you and me." The ship's horn sounded, and the captain shouted, "All aboard!" "Ah, come on, it will be, I promise," said Shrek. "I love you." Fiona struggled to get the words out, but Shrek gave her a big kiss, and before she knew it, he was aboard the boat, standing beside Donkey and Puss. The three friends waved. "Shrek!" Fiona cried as the boat began to pull away. "Wait!" "What is it?" shouted Shrek. She took a deep breath and called out, I'm pregnant!" All the fairy tale creatures began to cheer. Shrek rubbed an ear in disbelief. "You're what?" "You're going to be a father!" cried Fiona. Shrek stood for a moment speechless. He laughed nervously. That's great!" "I know!" cried Fiona. "I love you!" Shrek smiled weakly. "Yes, me too." Queen Lillian put her arm around Fiona, and they stood on the dock, waving until the boat disappeared into the mist. "Ah!" Shrek screamed. Donkey and Puss stared at him, alarmed. Shrek, are you okay?" cried Donkey. "Oh!" moaned Shrek. "I can't believe I'm going to be a father." Donkey and Puss exchanged worried glances. Shrek leaned over the ship's railing and tried to compose himself. "How did this happen?" he whined. "Allow me to explain," offered Puss. "You see—" "I know how it happened," growled Shrek. "I just can't believe it." Donkey cozied up to Shrek. "Look, you're going to love having kids. It's like living your childhood all over again." Shrek stared at him in horror. Okay, I get it, so you didn't have a happy childhood," said Donkey. Shrek's ears drooped and he hung his head. "I'm doomed." "You'll be fine," said Donkey. "You're finished," said the ship's captain. Donkey, Shrek and Puss looked at him. The captain cleared his throat. With your journey." He pointed to the shore. There, on a high bluff, stood a majestic castle. Puss leapt on Shrek's shoulder. "We'll find Fiona's cousin, and your problems will be over, boss. Well, except for the baby thing." Shrek, Donkey and Puss stood across the moat from the castle and watched as the drawbridge creaked down. "Oh, they must be expecting us," cried Donkey. They'd begun to march across when they heard a horse whinnying. They turned to see it galloping towards them, pulling a busload of schoolchildren. The three friends jumped out of the way to let it go by, the children screaming in horror at the sight of Shrek. Donkey was puzzled. "What kind of place is this?" Shrek shuddered. "My palms just got sweaty. Must be a high school." "High school?" cried Donkey. Inside the courtyard, a group of medieval cheerleaders were practicing. "Ah!" As Shrek stalked past, a startled kid ran off. "I'm starting to feel nauseous from memories of wedges and swirlies," moaned Donkey. Puss eyed him curiously. "But how did you receive the wedges when you are clearly not the wearer of the underpants?" "Let's just say some things are better left unsaid," said Donkey. They paused to listen to two girls who were huddled together discussing their love lives. "So then I was all like, I'd rather get the Black Plague than go out with you," said one. "Hey, totally," agreed the other. Pardon me," said Shrek. Totally, ugh!" cried one. "Yeah, totally," agreed the other as they fled in terror. In another corner of the courtyard, a couple of dorky guys were playing Dungeons and Dragons. "Yes," they heard one shout, "I've just altered my character level to +3 super ability." Shrek went up to them. "Hi, we're looking for someone named—" "Gee," the boy interrupted, "who rolled a +9 dork spell and summoned the beast and his quadrupeds?" The other boy guffawed and snorted in delight. Shrek rolled his eyes. "Can either of you teenage maladroits tell me where I can find Arthur?" "He's over there," said the first boy, pointing towards the athletics field. Shrek could see a bold knight in shining armour astride his white steed. The three friends hurried to the field just as the knight charged. Wham! The lance hit, sending the other knight flying over Shrek's head. The triumphant knight removed his helmet to show off his handsome face and satisfied grin. "There is no sweeter taste than victory," he cried. "Oi, right, ooh, ooh, ooh," cheered the other jocks in the audience. Shrek was impressed. He turned to Puss. "Does Arthur look like a king or what?" He smiled and stepped towards the victorious knight. "Ow!" came a small voice. Shrek looked down and saw he had stepped on the knight's opponent. "Oh, sorry." The knight was still sprawled out where he had hit the ground. "Were you looking for Arthur?" he asked. "That information is on a need-to-know basis," replied Puss. "Is he in trouble?" asked Artie. "It's top secret. Hushity-hush," added Donkey. "Yeah, sure, no problem," said the kid. "Now let's away to the showers," the victorious knight was shouting. "Oi, right, ooh, ooh, ooh," shouted the jocks in unison. But at the sight of the big ogre, the knight's horse reared up in fear, and the knight came crashing to the ground. Shrek stood over him. "Greetings, your majesty. This is your lucky day. Your kingdom awaits." "So what like are you supposed to be?" asked the knight. "Some kind of giant mutant leprechaun or something?" "Yeah, right, sure," replied Shrek. He scooped up the knight, tossed him over his shoulder, and carried him off. "Unhand me, monster!" shouted the knight. "Calm down, Arthur," said Shrek. "We're late for your coronation." "I'm not Arthur," declared the knight. "I am Lancelot." Shrek looked back and saw Lancelot's opponent racing away. "Hey!" Shrek shouted. Arthur kept on going. Shrek dropped Lancelot and stormed off after Arthur, with Donkey and Puss trying to catch up. One of the cheerleaders waved to get Shrek's attention. "This is totally embarrassing, but my friend Tiffany thought perchance you would want to ask her to the homecoming dance." Excuse me?" cried Shrek.
"It's whatever," the cheerleader continued. "She's just totally into college guys and mythical creatures and stuff."
While she popped her gum, Shrek, Puss and Donkey darted into the school to search the classrooms for the elusive Arthur.
"Oh, Arthur! Come out wherever you are!" called Shrek.
Suddenly, Puss called out,
"Check it out, boss! Arturo at 2 o'clock!"
They saw Arthur darting into the gymnasium, where the entire student body had gathered for a pep rally. Principal Pinchley stood in the centre of the gym, holding a megaphone. Students filled the stands on each side. Pinchley was just thanking Professor Primbottom for his invigorating lecture on how to just say nay, when two students stepped up, one dressed as a dragon, the other as a griffin. Pinchley greeted the two students. And now, without further ado," he cried through the megaphone, "let's give a warm Worcestershire huzzah to the winner of our new mascot contest." Suddenly, the doors of the gymnasium burst open, and Shrek's enormous, terrifying bulk stood framed in the doorway. "The ogre?" said Pinchley. The band started to play, and the students began to cheer. The Griffin pulled off his mask and threw it to the ground. "It was supposed to be me," he fumed. "This is all indeed a bit unorthodox," dithered Pinchley. Shrek grabbed the megaphone. "Come on out, Arthur. I know you're in here." The crowd suddenly burst into a fit of laughter. Shrek, Puss and Donkey turned around to find Artie suspended by his underwear from the nearby basketball hoop. "Hi there. Do you mind coming down? 'Cause we need to get going. You're the new king of Far, Far Away." The crowd gasped in surprise. Then the students began to giggle. "Artie, a king? More like the mayor of Loserville," taunted Lancelot. By now the whole audience was roaring with laughter. "Hey, that's royalty you're messing with," Shrek growled. Puss leapt through the air and cut Artie free, so he fell right into Shrek's arms. "Is this for real?" asked Artie. "Yep. Let's go and get you fitted for your crown," Shrek said. As they headed towards the exit, the school band played Hail to the Chief. Artie's face lit up with excitement. "Give me a second." He turned to face the crowd. "Well, well, look who's a king. Farewell, friends. It breaks my heart, but I've got to go. Enjoy your stay in prison while I rule the free world." "All right, let's not overdo it," said Shrek. "I'm building my city, people," replied an excited Artie. Shrek grabbed him by the arm and led him out of the gymnasium. Queen Lillian and the princesses in Far, Far Away had planned a baby shower for Fiona in the castle library. The princesses gasped in admiration as Fiona arrived in her fancy new maternity gown. "Look at you!" cried Snow White. "Wow!" cheered Rapunzel. "You look darling!" gushed Snow White. Even Sleeping Beauty woke up for the occasion. "Ooh, it's present time!" sang Snow White. The birds and little forest creatures flocked around her, twittering and chirping. Cinderella pointed excitedly at the big pile of gifts. "Oh, Fiona, please open mine first. It's the one in front." Fiona read the card. "Congratulations on your new messmaker. Hopefully this will help." She chuckled uncomfortably as she unwrapped the package and pulled out a plastic bag and pooper scooper. The princesses oohed and ahed. "Will you look at that?" said Doris. "Fiona! Fiona!" cried the other fairy tale creatures. "We all chipped in for a present too!" cried one of the little pigs. Pinocchio presented Fiona with a fancy baby carrier. "Ta-da!" cried the gingerbread man, popping out from inside. "Ooh!" crooned the princesses. "Oh, you guys, that's so sweet," said Fiona. "Thank you." But outside the window she heard odd noises. Even more worrisome, Dragon let out a fearful, rumbling roar. And fairy tale creatures parted in the castle. The sky above, Far, Far Away, was darkening with villains. They rode on broomsticks, and Prince Charming led the way. "Onward!" he cried, "to our happily ever after!" He threw back his head and laughed an evil laugh. "Ha ha ha ha! Bums away!" Evil trees were hanging under the broomsticks. The pilots swooped down and released their payload. The evil trees landed on the streets below. People screamed and fled in terror. An evil knight scared away the customers at the coffee shop and drank all the unfinished cups of coffee. Another villain threw a cart through a store window. The big Cyclops gleefully pulled letters out of the letterbox, ripped the stamps off and stuffed them back in. Prince Charming swooped down. "To the castle!" he ordered, and the evil villains soon had the castle surrounded. "Rah!" Dragon roasted one of them with her fiery breath, but more villains zoomed in to circle her. Hearing Dragon's roar again, Fiona leaned out of the window to find out what was happening. She spotted a group of witches dropping a heavy metal net over Dragon. "It's a siege!" squeaked the gingerbread man, slamming the library door shut. The three pigs and Pinocchio pushed a dresser in front of it. The little fairy tale creatures braced themselves against it. "Fiona, go and take care of the baby," piped Gingy bravely. The princesses panicked. "Everybody stay calm!" cried Snow White. "We're all going to die!" Fiona took charge. She pushed on the side of the fireplace, and a secret door opened, revealing an underground passageway. "Everyone in, now!" she ordered. Outside the library door, the villains were using one of the evil trees as a battering ram. Cyclops sat astride it like a mechanical bull, whooping gleefully. "Yee-haw!" Boom, boom, boom. The door was beginning to give way. "Go!" cried Fiona, ordering the princesses down the stairs. Boom! The door burst open, and the villains stalked in. "Where are Shrek and Fiona?" demanded Prince Charming. "Names don't ring a bell," said Gingy nonchalantly. "Yeah," agreed one of the pigs. "I suggest you freaks cooperate with the new king of Far, Far Away," threatened Prince Charming. "You're only ever going to be king of the stupids," blurted Gingy. Charming snapped his fingers. "Hook! Avast ye, Cookie!" cried Captain Hook, raising his hook under Gingy's chin. "Start talking!" Queen Lilian, Fiona, and the other princesses were desperately trying to escape through the secret passageways deep under the castle of Far, Far Away. Fiona was in front, holding a torch to light their way. Sleeping Beauty yawned.
"We've been walking for hours and my feet are killing me," she complained.
Doris hoisted the drooping Beauty up on one of her broad shoulders. "So I guess we just wander aimlessly in this stinky hole until we rot," jeered Snow White. "No," cried Fiona. "We get inside and find out what Charming's up to." Suddenly she spotted a dim light overhead. "That's it!" she cried. She led the way up a long ladder, lifted a metal grate, and crawled out into the castle courtyard. They all snuck around the corner of a building and hid. A construction job was going on. Prince Charming had ordered the building of a big new theatre. A large tower facade was hoisted up on the stage, and pictures of Charming were being hung everywhere. A group of guards marched past, and the princesses hugged the wall. "Come on, this way!" cried Rapunzel, taking off in the opposite direction. "Rapunzel, wait!" cried Fiona as they followed her into the castle. As she charged through the doors, Fiona spotted Prince Charming at the end of the hallway, holding Rapunzel by the arm. "Grrr!" Rapunzel purred at him. "Ruff!" Charming barked at her affectionately, and the two of them shared a long kiss. The princesses gasped in shock. "Say hello, ladies, to the new queen of Far, Far Away," declared Prince Charming. "Jealous much?" asked Rapunzel. "Rapunzel!" cried Fiona. "How could you?" Armed guards moved in and surrounded Queen Lilian and the princesses. "Thanks to Rapunzel, you'll soon be back scrubbing floors," declared Charming. "That is, if I let you last the week." "But, Pookie, you promised you wouldn't hurt them," Rapunzel whined. "Not here, Kitten Whiskers," warned Charming. "Daddy will discuss this later." "Shrek will never let you get away with this," cried Fiona. Prince Charming flashed a sadistic smile. "There's nothing your precious ogre can do this time, Princess. Now, forgive us, but we have a show to put on." The guards marched off with the defeated princesses in tow. The next morning, Shrek woke up in the dark forest, still far away from Far, Far Away. Something was amiss, but what was it? He heard a fluttering and turned. It was just a little bird landing on the branch of a tree. As soon as Shrek turned his back again, the branch slammed the bird against the trunk, and it dropped silently to the ground. A few leaves drifted down over Donkey, who was still snoring. Then long, dark shadows fell across the campsite. Shrek spun around. The trees were moving in. Puss awoke with a start and leapt onto Shrek's shoulder. The log Artie was resting on sat up, knocking him to the ground. Ow!" he cried, springing to his feet. Evil trees had them surrounded. "Ah!" Donkey screamed, finally roused from his slumber. Somewhere music was playing. Shrek peered through the vegetation and spotted Captain Hook at his piano. As the music built to a pounding crescendo, Hook barked an order to his pirates. "Kill 'em all!" He pointed his hook at Shrek malevolently. "Except the fat one! King Charming has something special in mind for you, ogre." "King Charming?" cried Shrek. Pirates dropped from the trees. One of them swung his sword at Artie. Shrek shoved Artie's head down in the nick of time. The pirate prepared to swing again, and Shrek lifted Artie over his head. Artie gave the pirate a kick that sent him tumbling. Puss drew his sword and protected Donkey. Captain Hook played a rousing fight song as two pirates wheeled in a large treasure chest. "Ready the plank!" cried Hook. A pirate threw a board down on a tree stump with one end over the open trunk. Several pirates held Shrek at sword point and forced him to walk the plank into the trunk. Backs together, Puss, Donkey and Artie desperately held off the villains, but a net dropped from one of the evil trees and scooped them up. Pirates aimed a cannon at the netted heroes and lit the fuse. "Ah!" cried Artie in a panic. Puss popped out his claws like switchblades to cut through the netting. Donkey gnawed it with his big teeth. Shrek burst out of the chest like a jack-in-the-box. Spotting the lit fuse, he jumped and came down hard on one end of the plank. The pirate on the other end was catapulted onto the cannon, swinging it around, its barrel now aimed at Captain Hook. Kablam! The cannonball blew the piano to pieces. Shrek grabbed an axe and threw it at the rope holding the net, setting Artie, Puss and Donkey free. The pirates regrouped and started to close in again. Quickly, Shrek took over the cannon and stuffed in another cannonball. The pirates spun on their heels and retreated. "Ah!" cried Captain Hook. "Cowards!" Shrek grabbed him. "What has Charming done with Fiona?" "She's gonna get what's coming to her," said Hook. He lifted his hook to strike Shrek, but it caught in the branches of an evil tree, and the tree dragged him off into the woods. "Come on!" Shrek called to his friends. Fiona and the others were in terrible danger. But Artie darted in front of Shrek. "Hold on!" he cried. "Merlin can help!" Merlin was sat cross-legged in front of his hut, chanting, "I am a flowing river, flow, flow, flow." Shrek looked at the old wizard sceptically. "I don't think so." "The guy's a wizard," said Artie. "Are you just going to run all the way home?" Shrek sighed impatiently. "You've got 1 minute, then we do it my way." Merlin was still chanting, "I am a buzzing bee, buzz." "Mr. Merlin," Artie interrupted him, "we need a spell to get us back to far, far away." Merlin glanced at Artie. "Forget it. I don't have it in me any more, kid." Artie burst into tears.
"It's just so hard," sobbed Artie. "We really need to get back because the kingdom's in terrible trouble, because there's a really bad man, and it's just so hard."
"Come on, take it easy," Merlin said.
"You don't understand," Artie blubbered. "There's a mean person doing mean things to good people, and they really need your help to get back."
Artie grabbed Merlin, pleading desperately.
"Why won't you help them?"
"Have a heart, old man," added Shrek for good measure. Merlin was speechless.
"Please,"
Artie begged. What could Merlin do? "Okay, I'll go and get my things," he said helplessly. As Merlin slipped into his shack, Artie recovered instantly. He looked at Shrek. "Piece of cake." Shrek smiled at him. Merlin returned with his spellbook. "Now, I'm a bit rusty," he warned, "so there may be side effects." "Side effects?" cried Donkey. "Don't worry. No matter how excruciatingly painful it is, it'll wear off eventually, I think." Merlin stretched and cracked his knuckles. A bolt of lightning shot out of his fingertips and shattered a rock. "Ha!" cried Donkey. "Oops," said Merlin. He began chanting, "Alicricious, expeditious, zoomy zoom zoom, let's help our friends get back soon." Magic rays shot from Merlin's extended fingers, and Shrek, Puss, Donkey and Artie disappeared in a puff of smoke. "Wow!" cried Merlin. "It worked! Nice kids!" In a flash, the kids found themselves falling from the sky. They bounced down through the branches of an apple tree and landed in a heap. Donkey groaned. "Oh, man, I haven't been on a trip like that since college." Shrek's jaw dropped. Was that Donkey's voice coming out of Puss's mouth? "Donkey!" he cried. "What?" Donkey looked down at his body, and his eyes widened in shock. "Oh, no!" he cried.
I've been abracadabraed into a second-rate sidekick."
"Actually, you look handsome," said Puss from Donkey's body.
"I am the one who looks like some bloated roadside piñata."
Sorry, guys," Artie apologised.
"Don't be," cried Shrek. "You got us back, kid. Thanks."
He pointed to a castle on the hillside. It was far, far away. As they entered the city, they saw the destruction done by Charming and his villains. The place looked like a war zone. Fires burned in the street, and there was graffiti everywhere.
"So this is the cesspool you want me to be king of?" questioned Artie.
"It wasn't like this when we left," said Shrek. Suddenly he spotted a little marionette theatre. Dancing inside it, behind the glass window, was... He squinted in disbelief.
"Pinocchio? Shrek!"
shouted the little puppet. As Shrek and the others rushed towards the theatre, the curtains began to close.
"Help me!"
squeaked the stringed puppet as he danced.
"What's happened?" asked Shrek.
"Charming and the villains attacked us and took over everything," cried Pinocchio as the music wound down.
"Now they have Fiona and the princesses locked away somewhere secret. You've got to find Charming. He's getting ready for the show."
The curtains closed.
"Wait!" cried Shrek. "Pinocchio! What show?"
Pinocchio's little puppet hand reached under the curtain and pointed to the poster on the wall of a building nearby. The picture on the poster showed Prince Charming, sword raised, with his foot pinning Shrek to the ground.
"It's a happily ever after all," Shrek read. "One night only at the castle. History the way it was meant to be." "Wow, Shrek!" cried Donkey. "You didn't tell us you were in a play." "Well, I guess I've been so busy I forgot to mention it," Shrek said, and strode towards the castle.
Prince Charming was in his new gold-plated dressing room, the walls covered with portraits of himself. He stared at his face in the three-sided mirror and adjusted the angle for a better view. But there behind him, standing in the doorway, was Shrek. Artie, Donkey and Puss stood beside him.
"It's over, Charming," said Shrek, looming towards him.
"So glad you could make it back," Charming said nonchalantly, pushing a hidden button. "I was afraid you might miss the show." Shrek picked him up by his shirt front.
"Where's Fiona?" he demanded.
"Don't worry," sneered Charming. "She and the others are safe. For now." Shrek tightened his grip, thinking he might just wring this schemer's neck. But at that moment, guards burst into the room and surrounded them. Charming smiled. "I think it's best you let me go." The guards were all pointing their swords directly at Shrek. He dropped Charming. As Charming brushed himself off, Artie struggled past the guards and glared at him.
"You're not the true king of Far, Far Away."
Charming rolled his eyes.
"And you are, I suppose?"
he asked, laughing. Artie stuck out his chin valiantly.
"Yes."
Charming raised his eyebrows at Shrek.
"This boy is pathetic." "That's enough, Charming. I'm here, and you've got what you wanted. Go, Artie," cried Shrek. "This isn't about you."
"Then who is it about?" asked Artie. "I'm supposed to be king, right?"
"You weren't really next in line for the throne," said Shrek.
"But you said—"
"I said whatever I had to say, all right? I wasn't right for the job, and I needed some fool to replace me, and you fit the bill. So just go."
Artie slumped.
"You've been playing me the whole time."
At that, Prince Charming motioned to the guards to let him go, and Artie walked out. As Shrek hung his head in shame, Charming leaned in close.
"You really have a way with children, Shrek."
Locked away in the dark dungeon, the princesses were going stir-crazy.
"Got to clean, got to clean, got to clean,"
repeated Cinderella, polishing every filthy thing in sight.
"Got to clean, got to keep it clean, bright and shiny kittens."
Sleeping Beauty lay snoring on an old prison cot. Snow White was pacing the damp floor. Doris tried to prise the prison bars apart with the sheer force of her enormous arms until something cracked in her back. Fiona stared out of the narrow window towards the castle. Snow White complained as she paced.
"Had we just stayed put, we could be sipping tea out of little heart-shaped cups."
The door of their cell flew open, and a guard tossed Donkey and Puss in. The door clanked shut.
"Donkey!" cried Fiona. "Princess!"
cried Donkey.
"Puss?"
asked Fiona. Puss waved his donkey hoof.
"Lo siento, Princessa, but I am Puss, stuck here inside this hideous body." "And I'm me,"
cried Donkey, waving his kitty paw. Fiona looked from one to the other, confused.
"But you're—"
I know, said Donkey. "Everything's a little fruity in the loops right now. But what happened is, we went to high school, the boat crashed, and we got bippity-boppity-booped by the magic man." "You poor, sweet things," purred Doris.
"I don't get it,"
cried Cinderella.
"The cat turned into a little horse that smells like feet," explained Snow White. "What's to get?"
"Huh? Who's that?" asked Sleeping Beauty, half waking from her doze.
"Where's Shrek?"
asked Fiona.
"Charming's got him," said Donkey, "and he plans on taking care of Shrek tonight, in front of the whole kingdom."
Fiona and her mother exchanged worried glances. Fiona took a deep breath.
"All right, everyone, we need to find a way out, now."
Yes, you're right," the princesses mumbled in agreement.
"Ladies, assume the position,"
cried Snow White. At that, Sleeping Beauty lay down as if asleep. Cinderella dusted off a spot and sat down, and Snow White lay back on a cot with her lips puckered.
"What in the world are you doing?"
asked Fiona.
"Waiting to be rescued,"
explained Sleeping Beauty.
"You have got to be kidding me,"
cried Fiona.
"Well, what do you expect us to do?"
asked Snow White.
"We're just four—"
She considered Doris for a moment.
"3 super-hot princesses, 3 circus freaks, a pregnant ogre, and an old lady."
Queen Lilian smiled and casually walked past the princesses.
"Excuse me, old lady coming through."
She moved up to the cell wall, laid her hands against it, yelled,
"Yee-haw!"
and head-butted a hole right through the bricks.
"Wow!"
cried the princesses, impressed.
"Oh, look," said the Queen. "I've stumbled across an opening."
"Mum?" gasped Fiona.
"Well, you didn't actually think you got your fighting skills from your father, did you?" she asked.
Fiona beamed proudly at her mum. She turned to the princesses with renewed confidence.
"OK, girls, from here on, we're going to take care of business ourselves."
The prisoners headed towards the castle. Fiona could see 2 evil trees guarding the entrance. She signalled Snow White with a duck call. Snow brushed off her skirt, tidied her hair, and skipped innocently down the path. She stopped in front of the evil trees, singing prettily.
"Ha ha 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 ha! Little birdies take a wink, flitting down from trees. They appear and chirp in my ear."
Soon all the little forest creatures were flocking to Snow White.
"All because I sing, ah ha 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 ha!"
The evil trees stared in delight as more and more creatures gathered around the beautiful princess.
"Ah ha 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 ha!"
she continued, until all the animals had arrived. Then her whole face changed in an instant. With the eye of the tiger, her song switched from sweet to tough.
"Ah ha ha ha! Ah ha ha ha!"
And the animals began to attack the evil trees. While the trees were busy fighting off the feisty furballs, Fiona led the charge of the princesses. Puss and Donkey took off in their own direction. They ran through the front gates of the far, far away zoo, where the donkeys were being held captive. The princesses, however, ran towards the castle entrance. Doris punched through the lock and opened the gate. As the princesses entered the castle grounds, a group of guards approached them. Cinderella aimed her glass slipper at one of them. It knocked him out cold and came swooping back to her hand like a boomerang. Sleeping Beauty fell to the ground, and the guards stumbled and tripped over her. With the guards in chaos and confusion, Doris gave the princesses a leg up over the castle wall. Downtown, Donkey and Puss raced towards the little puppet theatre where Charming was holding Pinocchio captive. They smashed the glass and pulled Pinocchio out. Gingy was locked up in a display case at the local bakery. Donkey pulled him out.
"Let's do this thing, people!"
Donkey shouted as he marched in Puss's boots.
"Go Team Dynamite!"
On the way back to the castle, one of the 3 little pigs noticed someone staring at them from behind the bushes. It was Artie. As soon as Puss and Donkey started to approach him, he turned away.
"You both knew what was going on the whole time, and you kept it to yourselves,"
Artie said.
Artie, Shrek only said those things to protect you, said Puss. Shrek saved your life, cried Donkey.
Artie stopped to think about it, and suddenly came to a realization. Captain Hook was conducting the orchestra. The lights dimmed and spotlights crisscrossed the audience. The curtain came up and smoke billowed across Prince Charming's stage like fog. It came to a stop below a tower. A spotlight shone on Rapunzel in the tower window, and she began singing.
I wait alone up here, I'm trapped another day. Locked up here, please set me free. My new life I almost see. A castle, you and me. Yes, a castle, you and me.
Then, from underneath the stage, a clamshell rose up and opened, revealing Prince Charming on horseback.
"'Tis I, he cried, upon my royal steed. Princess, my love, at last you shall be freed.
Rose petals floated down onto the stage like pink snow, and Charming and his steed leapt out of the clamshell. As he made his way to the tower, Charming sang,
I'm strong and brave and dashing my way there, with speed, with might, with soft and bouncy hair, through the blistering desert.
Charming swung his sword and chopped the head off a griffin puppet.
Hot, chorused the evil trees, across the stormiest sea.
Charming dismounted with a flourish and easily swooped the head off a cardboard sea serpent.
Wet,
chorused the evil dwarves.
Facing the fiercest of fanged fiends,
he sang, cutting the heads off a wooden bear and reindeer.
Foul,
chorused the fairy tale villains.
So you can gaze upon me.
Charming stood under Rapunzel's tower, serenading her.
I knew you'd come for me, she sang in reply, and now we finally meet. I knew you'd wait, and from my plate of love you'd eat, sang Charming.
Rapunzel let down her long braid. From the loudspeakers came a growling sound. A trapdoor on stage burst open in a flash of light and smoke. Backstage, Mabel roared into a megaphone, and evil dwarves turned a big metal lever. As they cranked, a large, imposing shadow fell across the stage. The audience oohed and ahed as the big ogre rose up through the trapdoor, gruesomely lit from below.
Who is this terrible, ugly fiend who so rudely intervened? Cried Charming. Will Charming fight or will he flee?
Sang the fairy tale villains, while pirates and evil knights danced in the background.
Oh, please, please rescue me,
sang Rapunzel.
From this monstrosity,
chorused the villains. Charming struck a dramatic pose.
Fear thee not, mademoiselle, I will send this thing back to hell, he sang.
Shrek's eyes widened in amazement as Charming's voice stretched to hit the ultra-high notes. Charming pulled out his sword and aimed it at the ogre's chest as he sang,
And you are about to enter a world of pain with which you are not familiar.
As he held the last high note, glass goblets began to shatter.
Ha!
He cried triumphantly.
It can't be any more painful than your singing, quipped Shrek.
The audience roared with laughter. Charming froze, distracted. He tried to remember his next line. He cued Captain Hook to start the music again.
Prepare, foul beast, your time is done,
he sang.
Oh, please, not again, moaned Shrek. Have mercy, kill me first.
The crowd began to laugh again, and Shrek smiled. Charming fumed.
Stop it! You're ruining the show!
Stop it! You're ruining the show!
Shrek mimicked.
Cut that out!
Cut that out!
I mean it!
I mean it!
Charming raised his sword and pointed it in Shrek's face.
Enough!
He commanded. The crowd hushed. Charming drew back his sword, ready to strike.
Now you'll finally know what it's like to have everything you worked for, everything that's precious to you, taken away. Now you'll know how I felt.
He clenched his teeth and thrust with all his might. The audience gasped. Then, suddenly, a fireball spread across the sky as Dragon flew above the theatre, melting Charming's sword.
Achtung!
Cried one of the three little pigs as he and his brothers flew across the stage on the headless griffin. Little Pinocchio flew in on his strings, and Gingy popped out of a bag of popcorn in the audience and jumped onto the stage. The wolf unzipped his wolf costume and stepped out. With a great roar overhead, Dragon flew by, with Puss and Donkey riding, and the little dronkeys following close behind.
Pray for mercy from Puss,
shouted Puss in Donkey's body.
"And Donkey!"
Donkey hissed from Puss's body. And then the Queen broke through the backdrop with a giant headbutt, followed by Sleeping Beauty and Doris. Snow White flew in behind them, and Cinderella ran on stage holding a mop as a weapon. The princesses struck a pose next to Shrek as the audience burst into applause. Suddenly, the front door of the swamp house on stage crashed to the floor, revealing Fiona.
"Hi, honey. Are we late?" "Just in time," declared Shrek.
Charming clapped his hands at the orchestra and nodded to Captain Hook. The fairy tale villains suddenly realized that this was their summons. One by one, they moved into action. Cyclops emerged from a trap door, cornering Donkey and Puss. The witches flew in to surround all of the princesses, and Gingy was surrounded by evil knights. There was no way out. Suddenly, a powerful spotlight shone into Charming's face. Then Artie jumped down from the rafters and addressed the crowd on stage.
"Who really thinks we need to settle things this way?"
The villain's hands shot up into the air.
"You're really telling me you just want to be villains your whole life?"
Artie demanded. The villains loomed closer.
"But we are villains," offered Hook. "It's the only thing we know."
"But didn't you ever wish you could be something else?" asked Artie. The villains looked at each other and considered the question.
"Well, it's easy for you to say," piped one of the evil trees. "You're not some evil enchanted tree."
Prince Charming growled in frustration.
"You idiots!" he shouted. "Don't listen to him! Attack them!"
Another evil tree reached around Charming and put a branch over his mouth.
"What Steve's saying here is that it's hard to come by honest work when the whole world's against you," explained another tree. "Right, thanks, Ed," said the first.
Artie walked among the villains, looking each one in the eye.
"A good friend of mine once told me, just because people treat you like a villain doesn't mean you are one."
The fairy tale villains listened intently.
"The thing that matters most is what you think of yourself," Artie added. "If there's something you really want to be, then the only person standing in your way is you."
Artie glanced over at Shrek, and they exchanged smiles. A pirate looked alarmed.
"Me?" he cried. No, what I mean is that each of you is standing in your own way," Artie yelled.
By now, the villains were all nodding in agreement. The Headless Horseman pushed through the crowd.
"I've always wanted to learn to play guitar," he confessed. "I'd like to open a spa in France," said the evil queen. "I grow daffodils," said Captain Hook.
Everyone stared at the crusty old pirate in disbelief.
"And they are beautiful," he added.
One by one, the villains threw down their weapons and began chatting with one another about their hopes and dreams. Prince Charming looked on, stunned. Angrily, he kicked himself free of the tree and grabbed a discarded sword. He charged through the crowd towards Artie, shouting,
"Ah!"
Artie faced him bravely. Shrek saw what was happening, and using all of his strength, he broke the chains holding him. Shrek flung the chain at Charming's sword and yanked the villain around. Charming kept charging and ran his sword right into Shrek. The ogre fell to his knees as everyone stood by in horror. Prince Charming couldn't believe his eyes. He'd finally killed his worst enemy. Shrek turned to Artie.
"Was that convincing enough?"
he asked, and laughed as he revealed the sword safely nestled between his arm and side.
"This was supposed to be my happily ever after," Charming shouted. "Well, I guess you need to keep looking, because I'm not giving up mine," responded Shrek.
And with that, Shrek summoned Dragon to tip the tower over with her tail. Charming looked up as the set fell upon him. When the dust cleared, Artie leaned down to pick up the crown that had tumbled off Charming's head.
"It's yours if you want it, you know."
Artie looked up and saw Shrek smiling at him.
"But this time, it's your choice," Shrek added.
Artie smiled back. He was about to answer when all the villains and fairy tale creatures joined together and lifted him up over their shoulders.
"Artie! Artie! Artie!"
they cheered. What could he do? Artie put on the crown. Donkey fought back the tears.
"Ah, man, just look at him. Our boy's all grown up."
"Yes, we have done well, my friend," said Puss. Suddenly Merlin appeared in a puff of smoke. "Okay, Signor Hocusy-Pocusy, the time has come to rectify some wrongs," cried Puss. "Yes, 'cause I'm not doing any more of these cat baths," said Donkey. Merlin rubbed his hands together. "You may feel a pinch," he said. Bolts of lightning shot out of his magic fingers, and instantly Puss and Donkey were switched back into their own bodies. "Oh, I'm me again!" cried Donkey. "And I am not you!" cheered Puss. The two pals hugged each other and laughed and walked away. Merlin chuckled as he saw that Puss still had Donkey's tail and Donkey still had Puss's tail. "Ah, never mind," Merlin said as he slipped away. Fiona glanced over at her mother and smiled. Queen Lillian nodded and smiled back. Shrek took Fiona's hand. "Sorry I left you here," he said. "I should never have gone." "For what it's worth, I think you would have made a great king," said Fiona. "I have something more important in mind," said Shrek. He smiled and touched her belly. Fiona smiled, and the ogre and wife shared a long, smoochy kiss. Fiona and Shrek returned happily to their swamp, and it wasn't long before their home was filled by the pitter-patter of little ogre feet. Shrek was the expert at making baby formula from slug juice, eyeballs, and worms. He filled the gourd bottles and carried them over to Fiona, who was sitting in the comfy chair by the fireplace. She held 2 babies on her lap, and another crawled over to Shrek and tugged at his leg. Shrek laughed and gave Fiona and the babies a big hug. After feeding time, Donkey and Puss showed up at the ogre's door. "Hey, I smell Shrek Jr.," cried Donkey. Dronkies streamed in behind him. Dragon peered in fondly from the doorway. Shrek did his best trying to change the babies. He twisted the nappy around, gave it a tug, and the baby went flying through the air, landing in a nappy that Fiona was holding. Puss looked down at one of the ogre triplets on the floor. The baby pulled the dummy out of her mouth, shoved it into Puss's, and gave the cat a hug, while a Dronky baby pulled on his tail. One of the ogre babies pulled the wax out of Daddy's ear and began using it like a crayon to draw pictures. Bursting with pride, Queen Lillian bounced one of her grandbabies on her lap. Suddenly they heard a knock at the door. Donkey was lying on the floor holding one of the gourd bottles in his hooves and drinking from it. Shrek grabbed the bottle from Donkey. "Hey!" Donkey complained. Shrek opened the door, and there stood the nanny dwarf Snow White had given them. "Where's the baby?" demanded the dwarf. Shrek popped the bottle in the dwarf's mouth and shooed him away. He and Fiona were going to do this parenting thing themselves. Indoors and out, the swamp was overrun by bouncing babies. Shrek built them a beautiful mudslide. Then came Shrek himself with the most enormous sploosh. The little ones giggled in glee. In the evening, the babies were almost ready to go to sleep. Shrek held one over his shoulder and burped him. Fiona patted and burped another. The third crawled past one of the Dronkies, who let out a little flame belch of his own, lighting the ogre baby's fart like a flamethrower. Fiona and Shrek looked on proudly. They gathered up the babies and tucked them in. "Ah, finally," sighed Shrek. For the first time all day, the swamp was as quiet as a church. "Well, what shall we do now?" Before they could move an inch, they were both fast asleep. Until... Wah! "Oh, Shrek," Fiona sighed. "I'm on it," he muttered, as he stumbled to the kitchen to warm up the gourds of yummy slug juice. Soon all the babies were drinking from their bottles contentedly. Shrek beamed as he watched them through his sleepy ogre eyes, and he knew it was really true. He had found what he was looking for. His happily ever after all. The End. Shrek the Third was adapted by Kathleen Weidner-Zoerfeld and read by Richard Mitchley. Copyright 2010 DreamWorks Animation, LLC. Produced by Harper Audio at HarperCollins Publishers Limited.